Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this afternoon's intriguingly entitled conversation, Now that we have to do everything, what are we going to do? Undoubtedly, the climate emergency is the existential challenge of our time. Achieving the climate transition to a more sustainable way of life is an urgent priority. Today...
What he said.
Absolutely, it's really that urgent. Today, our panelists, that's the kind of creative thinking we want. Today, our panelists will explore one important question. If the way we live now cannot be sustained, then how are we going to live differently? I'd like to start by introducing our three panelists. To my left, Jim Livesey, Vice President for Research and Innovation at the University of Galway and a Professor of Global and Revolutionary History. Jim has enjoyed a long career in academia at the University of Dundee, Harvard University, Trinity College Dublin, and the University of Sussex. Next to Jim is Florian Schneider. Florian is a Professor of Art Theory and Documentary Practices at Trondheim Academy of Fine Art at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, NTNU. Since 2022, he also serves as President of the Society for Artistic Research, an international alliance of more than 70 universities and art academies. Florian is a filmmaker, writer, and curator. He has been engaged in a wide range of projects to rethink impact and value of documentary practices across artistic disciplines. And finally, to my right, Zoe Romano. Zoe is a craftist, a digital and fabrication strategist, and a lecturer focused on social innovation, women in tech, and open design. She has worked in strategic communications and co-founded one of the first makerspaces in Milan, focused on design and fashion. What else from the beautiful Milan? She is now a consultant and collaborator on digital social innovation projects. So our three panelists today are brought together by one common project, a European Commission-funded research and innovation project called PACESETTERS, which you'll hear a little bit more about later. PACESETTERS explores how turning to creative practice can help to advance social change and drive the climate transition. They are united by a shared belief that art and culture, heritage and creativity can make a real difference in helping us to transition to more sustainable lives. So, to get started, each of our panelists is going to take 5 minutes to set out their manifesto for a more sustainable life. We'll start with Jim, who will set the context for the transition we are facing. And then Florian will tell us why creative practice can provide the answers. And finally, Zoe will bring this approach to life with some practical examples. So Jim, I'm going to hand over to you.
Okay, thanks so much, Caroline. And I noted that you took 2 minutes away from me there. I want them back. Okay. All right, good. So now that we have to do everything is an appallingly disorientated feeling, right? And I'm sure you've all felt it. Like, how do you respond to the climate challenge? It seems like triaging your garbage or driving an EV doesn't feel like an adequate response to the existential circumstance we find ourselves in. Right, why is that? Why are you so disorientated? Why are we all so disorientated? It's because we are in a transition, right? Don't worry, you won't need to. I'm just using this to keep myself on go, right? Transitions are incredibly rare. This is the third one in human history. Human history is roughly 10,000, well, maybe 12,000 years long, okay? So we've only had 3 of these. This is the third. This is the green transition. The one we had before that was, of course, the industrial transition, okay? And the one before that was the Neolithic transition, okay? So these are transitions. Most of our lives, and people my age, we have not lived in transition. What we've lived in has been equilibrium. And to understand a transition, you have to understand what an equilibrium is. An equilibrium is what you carry around in your head. You carry around the conditions of rationality, the conditions of what counts as reasonable behavior. For you and I, even people in the same room, to engage with one another, we have to make one another predictable. Not in an interiority. No one can really get into the heart and soul of anybody else, right? But in terms of what the expected behavior of the people around you is. And what the industrial equilibrium did was that it made the behavior of people all over the world. It was a global equilibrium, right? It was a global equilibrium. It made that rational and predictable. How did it do that? Well, the equilibrium before that, of course, was the Neolithic equilibrium. They're in the dark, so I'm just going to talk, right? The Neolithic equilibrium. What happened there was human beings had to endogenize what had previously been exogenous elements. Those exogenous elements were plants, like acorn wheat, right? And animals, or domesticated animals, right? And previously, humans had lived with those as part of their environment, but not part of their close environment. The creation of the farm was this amazing social innovation, this incredible social innovation that endogenized plants and animals, that created companion species. And we have co-evolved with those companion species right through the last 10,000 years, to the point where us and our companion species are the dominant biota on the entire planet, all right? That was an incredibly strong equilibrium, incredibly strong equilibrium. The surplus money taken from those farms as rent, that was the basis for every civilization up to the 17th century, right? Notre Dame Cathedral, the Great Wall of China, the pyramids, they were all based on the extraction of a surplus from the peasant family, right? I know in Ireland when you say peasant, it sounds awful. Actually, that's just a common social science word, right? So the farm was this amazing thing, and it was the basis for empire. It was the thing that everything stood on. What destroyed that equilibrium was, of course, the discovery of oceanic trade, which created the possibility of a completely connected world. And what the farm did for the Neolithic transition, right? The connected city did for the industrial transition. We have beautiful examples of the contrast. Under the Neolithic transition, we had a very strong idea of justice, that everybody should get what was appropriate to them, right? Everybody should get what was appropriate to them, and it's very hierarchical. You owed the king your fealty. If you had a debt you couldn't pay, you would put your daughter into debt bondage in order to pay it off, right? These conditions still exist in some parts of the world. This moves in the industrial equilibrium to profit. It's not that debt is that important now, though debt's still part of our world. Now what you're looking for is profit. The most important idea is not justice, everybody gets what they want, or everybody gets what's appropriate to them. The most important idea is utility. How can we maximize the utility, maximize the value in a set of relationships, right? First person to come up with this idea, of course, was an Irishman, Francis Hutcheson, 1725, different lecture, right? That was an incredibly stable world. If I give a really concrete example, and I hope this isn't too provocative for somebody in the room, a farmer trying to maximize milk production by putting nitrogen on their land in order to feed their cattle was working to maximize utility. That farmer was trying to scale up their herd in order to produce more milk at a cheaper price. It was a better return to the farmer, and it made milk cheaper for consumers. It was an absolutely everybody wins solution to a social coordination problem, right? And we know the exogenous condition that has made that unstable, right? We know the exogenous condition, and it's the same for all the solutions we've come to, for capital markets, for consumption, for the production of goods, for the production of services. The externalities, what are called in economics, the externalities, the things that don't have to be priced, such as the quality of the air, or the quality of the water, right? Or land use, or the productivity of the soil. All of those externalities now impose themselves upon us. Not just the physical stuff, right? And there's loads of technical solutions, also the psychic stuff, right? How are people to live in a world where the seasons are completely disturbed, right? Like our summer this year. So there's this giant externality called nature, which somehow needs to be endogenized. Just as we made acorn wheat and long-legged sheep part of us 10,000 years ago. And when you visit the Burren, when you walk on that landscape, you can imagine that covered in oak trees with early farmers planting on it, or up on Céide fields where they've fenced it off to keep their livestock. We're part of this history. Right, so that was, and then in the early modern period, where the entire human race, the entire planet, endogenized itself, it made it one global world. And we used exchange, we used communication. The thing I want to have in your head is the coffee shop as a site of communication, site of experimentation. We're now faced with this enormous challenge, where now we have to endogenize all of nature, and we have to do it across time as well, which is even more important. Time in both directions. Every time we burn coal, we're burning the sunlight from the Permian extinction 250 million years ago. That's deep time. And when we do that, we affect time in the other direction for hundreds of years, right? But the question then is, how can we even imagine the way to go forward? And the idea of our project is that through creative practice, we explore the drivers which will get us through this transition. I'll hand over to Florian.
Great. Thank you very much. This was indeed the perfect serve, no? I mean, to use metaphor from tennis now. But I have to make a, you have to forgive me, I have to make a disclaimer. It's not just that we are not at the point. I also don't think that art and culture can provide answers. I think I also don't think that it can help to ask the right questions also. I think, and this is why we love the privilege of working in this field. It allows us, or it entitles us, or it really challenges us to question everything, or to learn how to question everything that exists. And this is indeed the kind of engine that drives transitions or societal transformations. This is not about an extrapolation of everything we know from the past, or all the data of the past. Yeah, this what is nowadays called artificial intelligence. Yeah, it's the capacity to rethink and to question everything or all that exists. So our new EU-funded project, PACESETTERS, I mean, we decided, actually, I think in the last minute, we consulted our colleagues, the native speakers in the consortium, and we avoided the mistake to call it pacemakers, because in many languages it means the same. We understood at the right moment that it's not about a medical device that sends impulses in order to keep the heart at normal rhythm. No, it's actually a term from sports, and more precisely from mid and long distance running. It's about keeping the pace high at the start of the race in order to avoid any kind of tactical maneuvers. And I think when it comes to the green transition or the climate transition or the European Green Deal, what we experience at the moment, and I was listening this morning to the speech of the president or the re-elected president of the European Commission, yeah, what we experience or sadly have to experience is a lot of tactical maneuvering. A lot of greenwashing and a lot of finding ways out of the commitments that have been made and that are so necessary. So we think that it is the role of art and culture to drive this transition. And for this, we need to develop the most diverse forms of artistic expression and cultural work, but also way beyond that. And most importantly, we have to figure out how can artistic practices contribute to new forms of knowledge production that are able to face the complexity of the challenges we are facing. So we think that this requires, on one hand, a kind of collective understanding of research and knowledge production. We call it co-research. It's not a new term. It was invented in the end of the 50s, early 60s in Italy, actually. It means to engage all stakeholders as active participants of a research process rather than as outsiders or observers. And the second important aspect that we want to highlight in this project is the power of artistic research. So we want to seize the opportunity to understand art and culture, not just as decoration, not just as illustration or entertainment, but as a peculiar form that allows us to produce knowledge. It's not the same knowledge as in the sciences, but it's knowledge that is at least equivalent. It's knowledge not about art, but it's knowledge that is generated through artistic practices or through the privileges of artistic practice. So we try to explore this new role of art and culture, heritage and creativity through methods of artistic research. And this we combine with a third methodological approach, which is called abductive reasoning. So as opposed to inductive or deductive reasoning, we start with an hypothesis. For example, art and culture will drive the climate transition. We don't have evidence. We don't have a proof that this is really the case or that this might be the case, but it's an hypothesis. And we start with this hypothesis and we continuously adjust and refine this hypothesis based on the results of the multiple ongoing research processes and then iterative consultations with the stakeholders and participants. And this would allow us to shift from merely or exclusively cognitive forms of knowledge production to what we suggest to call affective forms of knowledge production. So it's about the power to create affect on one hand. This is clear. This is what art and culture is supposed to do in our societies. This is what we experience at the festival these days and in many, many other registers. But it's also, and this becomes very, very important in the peculiar situation in which we find ourselves today in the age of climate crisis, it's also about the opposite, the power to be affected. Yeah? So to understand this not as a kind of victimhood, yeah, or as a kind of limitation of capacities. No, through the power to be affected. And this is what we experience every time we go to a museum or we are in a concert or we see a theater play. The power to be affected by the artistic practice, by the artistic activity, really encourages us and increases our capacity or ability to act. And this is the kind of, I think, everyday experience that we want to translate from the cultural and creative sector, where this is isolated. It's within a magical circle. Yeah, you're allowed to do this in the museum or in the theater space. There you can be as radical as you want, as long as it doesn't matter. We want to translate these privileges from these fields in which they are supposed not to matter, yeah, into the areas and fields of knowledge production where they have impact, value, and can be carried out on a high level of quality. So the battlefield of this climate transition, in our opinion, and this is also what sets us apart from many, many other research projects on this topic, there's another hypothesis. Yeah? The battlefield of the climate transition, the ground on which the future of our societies will be decided. This will not be in the inner cities, in the big capitals, or in the urban hotspots. It is in rural and remote areas, in small and medium-sized towns, and in the periphery of the big centers. So innovation, in our opinion, and another hypothesis, innovation happens usually where it's least expected. This is one thing that makes innovative practices so very, very difficult to calculate. So art and culture will be key in the struggle for just and sustainable transitions. And not only because art and culture are essential for every society as a contribution to social cohesion or as a foundation for social progress and innovation. Art and culture also creates and makes a significant contribution to the overall CO2 emissions. So climate change is also due to the activities that are dedicated to noble and honorable causes like art and culture. We have to face this reality, but the effects of the transformation on art and culture will be dramatic, and they are hardly foreseeable at the present time. So the only thing we know, and this is how I want to come to the end, the only thing we know for sure at the moment about climate change, and I don't want to dispute here any scientific evidence or scientific results, but actually the only thing we know is that this will change everything. And the directly and indirectly related crises and disasters, they are forcing us to question our certainties, our habits, and they force us to leave our comfort zone. And therefore, I think this ability to question everything is one of the main virtues and main qualifications and main outcomes that we can learn when we integrate art and culture, heritage and creativity into our process of knowledge production.
Thank you, Florian.
Thank you. Yes.
Now, so you might
Yeah.
bring it all to life for us with some practical examples.
Exactly. So PACESETTERS is just started as a project. So what I wanted to bring to this discussion was some examples that I did in previous projects that were working on this approach that you've been explaining in theory. And I was experimenting during some other project that I collaborated with in Milan. So I'm going to go to the slides because, differently from what happens in when we think about circular economy, everyone is always talking about the R, the 3R, the 5R, the 6R. In an urban environment, what is really important is to deal with the reducing of the consumption, for sure, the reuse of the resources that we have in the city, and the fact of seeing maybe all material as something that is a resource for someone else. And for sure, we used to add another R, that is the relations, having new, unusual relationship happening in the community. So I wanted to show you some projects. In 2015 in Milan, there was the Expo, and the topic of Expo was food. And so there has been a lot of experimenting about new type of relationship with food and food waste in the city. So this association was an association composed by very young people, and they started in 2016. In Milan, we had many local markets. So every day of the week, there is a market in a different neighborhood. And at the end of the market, these young boys and girls, they were going with a small truck, and they were collecting the leftovers of food of the sellers of food. And they were repackaging these leftovers, and people that needed could come and have a queue and take this food. But then COVID arrived, and they couldn't, all these markets were canceled. And so they went to the general market in Milan, and they deal with the big distributor of food. And so they went distributor from distributor, asked for leftovers and collected these leftovers and created packages, and ambulances were bringing this food to families that need it. So it was a matter of really creating relationship, and we helped them and support them also creating, facilitating their process, but it was based on relationship. A second project that is similar is another, these are also young people coming from design background, and they did this hybrid, it's called birra ibrida, hybrid beer, because it's made with leftovers of bread in the neighborhood. So they were collecting leftover of bread from a bakery shop, and they were bringing to microbrewery in the city, and they were creating the label according to where, in which neighborhood was the beer created. And so they really like connected and created a relationship with microbrewery in the city, created a relationship between bakery shop that could join and give the leftover of bread. And of course, these projects had to face many issues regarding what you can do and what you cannot do. Many of the rules that are in the city are moving, for example, the waste or what is considered waste has some rules that are based on the industrial society. Now we need also to change, and this European project allows to understand us, make us understand which are the rules that are not contemporary anymore, that are blocking our actions. For example, they were not allowed to collect the bread or, for example, the leftovers of coffee, because you can do things also with coffee, because you are not registered as a waste manager company. And so we had to create specific protocols with the city of Milan to say, can we collect this? We are not making weird things, we're just experimenting. So for sure, for the transition, we need to understand and make a collaboration between municipality, like startups, little companies that are starting to create new ideas, and then also, of course, producers that are creating resources that until the day before were considered waste. So another project that I worked on was focused on fashion and design. And this, for example, were like tote bags. I mean, every conference has these tote bags. In Milan, we have many conferences. You use virgin cotton to produce them. That is crazy, because then we have tons of these tote bags, and we just like not use them so much. But at the same time, we realized that luxury hotels, they were throwing away like sheets that are like 2 meters by 2 meters. They are white. They're very good quality cotton. And so he said, why we don't collect those when it's a bit worn over, and we match with social tailor shops that were employing many women that needed to find employment, so they could learn how to sew and then produce this type of bags. And so we also connected with like people that could silk print these bags, and so we did it, and they were not costing so much more than, but the impact of this production was much better. At the same time, we also have a lot of case study regarding small producers of fashion based in Milan using dead stock of textiles. Instead of producing from virgin material, there are a lot of like big virgin material that is leftovers from big companies, and so they create fashion, and they also use digital fabrication like laser cut to create specific decoration. So it's really customized fashion that can be done in an urban environment. At the same time, what we were experimenting was hacking knitting machines, the old knitting machines from the 70s and 80s, like finding new ways to creating punch cards. And so we could, instead of knitting by hand, we could use these machines, and we created a software that could allow to very fast create punch cards that could be laser cut and create like custom pattern. And so we engaged students in understanding how this machine work and in which way you could create a different way of micro-production in the city. Of course, there are also more technical advancement in this, like creating like specific shields to use all the needles of the machine and create more complex things. But it's just to say that this type of experimentation that are really key for a new vision that need a lot of like hands-on, like dirtying your hands in understanding how it works. It then takes you to, for example, this is a machine. This guy is Gerard Rubio. He's a friend. He was in Milan in 2014, rethinking the way knitting machine could work. And because you have like the industrial one, and then there are too costly. And so he managed to create this new type of machine that is a new way of thinking of knitting machine, not to be used in an industrial setting, but to be used in a community urban setting, and being able to facilitate the production of on-demand garments, knitted garments. So it's based on a software that can be customized, and then you can produce on demand based on design. And of course, just to finish, a couple of like other technologies that are very let's say flexible to like robots. We've been talking a lot about robots stealing our jobs and things like that, but actually in an urban environment, they are able to create microfactories that can be used by different designers, because robots are very you can code different behavior of the robot and allow you to create different type of objects out of it, and can be a common infrastructure in an urban environment to create on-demand products and not just factory robots, like felting products. And yes, I finish with this because rethinking. So this is an image from the medieval time in which people believed that actually the sheep was a vegetable and was growing wool, and the plant was an umbilical cord going on the soil. And so there are a lot of legends, and I think also now there are a lot of legends on materials and stuff, and we need to reconnect with what we consume and how we produce it. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe, and thanks to our three speakers. So for the next couple of minutes, I'm going to put our three panelists through their paces a little bit with a few questions, but then I very much want to have the opportunity to open it up to you, the audience. So be thinking about your questions. I'm sure you have lots of them. So maybe to start, and for any and all three of the speakers really, two of the main challenges that would be widely acknowledged with driving the climate transition are the sense of creating a sense of urgency in people as individuals and owning that sense of urgency personally, and also giving people a sense of agency over the climate transition. So there is a sense in which it can become so overwhelming in a sense, and one can feel so helpless, I suppose, in the face of the climate emergency. The process that you talk about, and I'm interested in your views around asking questions and questioning everything, the process that you talk about here in terms of using the creative approach to drive a climate transition, how can you use that, I suppose, to give people back a sense of agency over this transition?
Yeah, actually, this is our favorite question.
I didn't know that, so that's okay.
Because I think it is the absolute, this is the key, it's one of the key questions in this context. So personally, I don't believe that awareness raising and behavioral change that is only based on kind of reiterating the doom and gloom stories of this is going to happen if we don't do this and that, and everything will be the whole world will be destroyed if we don't save the world now, and so on and so forth. Yeah, I think all these narratives that are dominating the discourse about the climate transition are actually, I mean, I don't think that this is on purpose or so, involuntarily reducing agency, and this is the dramatic experience that we make at the moment. That agency is more on the side of those who are refusing to accept the reality of climate change. Yeah? These are the people who are protesting on the streets and who are angry and so on and so forth, yeah? And develop a certain form of agency or even collectiveness. Yeah? While we are kind of constantly repeating this kind of top-down narrative, yeah, you have to change this, you have to do this, and so on and so forth, yeah. So I think it is absolutely crucial, and this is what our research is about. We want to find out how do we regain this urgency, the sense of agency, sorry.
Yes, yeah.
And another hypothesis in this context is, and this is also something that we take from, let's say, from artistic practices like painting or photography or filmmaking, we can regain this agency to collectively act together only by reframing these urgencies. Yeah? So reframing them in a way that allows us again to figure out how to act and how to counteract, countersteer, how to mitigate, and then basically reframe the climate transition as from a threat actually into an opportunity. And not only into a business opportunity to sell some solar panels and so on and so forth, yeah, but into an opportunity to imagine a radically different society that is necessary, a society and a production that is regenerative, yeah, and that is based on the fantastic examples that Zoe gave us, that is based on the idea of repurposing, because this is ultimately how we create new things. It's not by this kind of colonial industrial idea of pushing the frontier and conquering territory that is considered to be a blank space, yeah? And then we occupied this, and this is then the new. No, the new happens through strategies of repurposing, revisiting, reinventing the past or what is already there and repurposing it. And then, I mean, there's a beautiful concept in biology, evolutionary biology, which is called acceptation, yeah? Not adaptation, but acceptation. It's solving a big problem in evolutionary theory. A lot of progress, a lot of innovation, yeah, happens by using things against the grain, or brushing things against the grain, no? Using them in a way that was not predefined or not how the devices were used as, no? I mean,
Classic
I think
example being the panda's thumb.
Napoli is, I think, is the capital of this approach towards technology, no? But there's evidence also in biology. Birds, for example, grew feathers in order to impress the other sex. Only much later they found out that you can also use them for flying.
Very good. That's excellent.
This is basically a reframing
Yes.
of urgencies.
Two questions come out of that for me. I'm going to start with the one about repurposing, and I'm going to go to Zoe, if you don't mind. Zoe, there's a new emphasis coming on what I'm going to call repair culture, and the idea, you know, we haven't up to now had, in this country anyway, a particularly strong culture of repairing things. We are incentivized to throw them away and buy new things. But we have new EU legislation coming around repair, etc. I wonder if you could say a little bit about your thoughts on the importance of a repair culture in the future.
Yeah, I mean, repairing is really a key topic, especially because we need to act and activate in two ways. On one side, really pushing for these repair laws to come in place, because right now, actually, we've been taught to not repair. We've been forced to not repair. Most of our products are designed not to be repaired, and so there is an awareness right now that we cannot do that anymore because it's not sustainable. There are many reasons, and so we need to push because it has to be changed quickly. And on the other side, we need to allow and create an infrastructure of repairing in the cities, because right now there isn't. We cannot think that every household has the tools to repair. This is an old way of thinking of commercializing like the DIY area. But I believe a lot in like libraries that could evolve their role in the city, becoming also buildings where you have tools that you can take home and use, or having people to use the tools there, repair shop that allow you to do that, and have people that, like librarians, take care of the objects of the city. It's a part of cultures, because making and doing and all the objects that we use, all the tools, are part of the culture. So I think these two things, if we don't act to have these two things in place, is really hard to have a repair culture that is just based on a personal initiative. It cannot be a personal initiative. It's a collective and social thing that we need to implement.
Very good. Can I ask, for any of the three of you, a question around the social and community nature of this action? So what you describe is very much a social movement based on community action. The sense of a shared society is essential. But isn't it the case that technology is driving fragmentation and individualization, and there is much less of a sense of a shared society at the moment? Do you see a challenge in the fragmentation of society right now in terms of creating this shared understanding that we need?
So, the good theorists will tell you where the crisis is, there's also the solution.
Well,
right?
indeed, yeah.
And I think what the intuition that drives this project is, and remember the title, now that we have to do everything, right? So if you're a philosopher, that idea of totality, trying to get your head around the whole thing, you quite literally cannot because of the transition. And that experience of fragmentation that you advert to, Caroline, that's part of the experience of the transition. And I think what the two guys have said as well, those moments of disquiet and being out of your comfort zone, to use a cliche, of finding yourself at a distance and no longer reproducing a shared culture, that's the moment that opens up for creative practice. And what I think is evident is that and what you beautifully called the privilege of creative practice, which has been pushed back toward artists, this pushed back into that magic circle, that fragmentation releases and creates the possibility of agency. And when you perform an act that isn't scripted, because you frankly don't know what to do, when you're trying something, you are deploying your creativity and you're making a gesture toward the totality, now that we have to do everything. In those little things, people are already looking toward that everything. And if people find that with their phone, if they find that with their computer, which is, digital experience is ubiquitous experience for us now, that is as valid. There isn't some kind of deeply authentic place where we're all living in woodsheds and chopping things, right? That's a valid space of experience. It's one of the, and again, it's a theme. The odd effect of the climate crisis is actually to return that sense of agency and danger to everybody. The political question is, and not political in the party political, but the question is how do those experiments, how do those moves, how do those new actions find one another in order to create and then make stable new ideas of value?
Very good. To bring us to the maybe more challenging side of this approach, achieving sufficient scale in this type of approach is going to require a huge cultural change, isn't it? And a fundamental shift in the economic model by which we operate at the moment, in order to incentivize different behavior. I'd welcome your thoughts on how that might be achieved.
Yeah, I just wanted to add also, it's connected to the previous question, because, for example, what happened when, at the beginning of the 3D printing revolution. So in 2005, the patent on 3D printing technology expired. That's how 3D printer could become low cost, okay? There was since the 80s. But then in 2005, this happened, and there was this 3D printer low cost that you could do like 80% of the pieces. And what it happened that communities started to use it, but then the market arrived and started to put this trend and say, oh, we need a 3D printer in every home. Yeah. And we were the beginners, we were using it in a community way, say, we don't need a 3D printer in every home. It's enough in every neighborhood. But usually when something comes up, there is a new trend, then the market arrives and say, yes, everyone has to have this. But you need to, if you have a critical thinking and you think and you understand what is the object about, you say, we don't need that in every house. And so in fact, it was we don't have a 3D printer in every house because people realize that they don't need it, and it's good. And I consider this a good thing that the trend just deflated because that becomes consumeristic approach, and we don't want that. So of course, 3D printers are useful for many things that I don't have time here to say why, but it's something that can be shared in a community as like many other objects. So we can reduce in sharing, and this can happen at a community level, and this can be done in repurposing public administration buildings for these activities, but also having services, for example, pay lower rents if they provide these services to the community instead of selling new products. So there is a balance and a discussion that has to be made.
Very good.
But I think the question of scaling is also, and this connected to this point also, is essentially connected to what we call creative divisions of labor. Yeah. So, for example, the division between, and this is very typical for the entertainment business, yeah, the division between an audience and the performers, yeah, or the actors. We need to, we can only scale these approaches if we undo these kind of divisions of labor. Yeah? And this is not, it's by far not limited to consumerism. Yeah? It's basically, I don't think that it's about abandoning it or ignoring it, yeah? But it's it's reinventing and changing and making it more dynamic. Also in a sense that creativity is not the privilege of a creative class. Yeah, creativity is not an individual individual virtue or an individual quality, property. Yeah, creativity is something that is essentially collective. Yeah, you can't perform a theater play without an audience. So the audience is contributing to this. And what we experience also in the kind of platform economies and the digital entertainment business at the moment, yeah, is that the most productive and the most creative activities is the activity of those who were supposed to be the consumers. Yeah? So we have to completely rethink these divisions yeah, of creative labor. Yeah? And then I think we can hopefully, probably, create the conditions also for a different kind of scaling, a scaling that is more transversal than vertical or horizontal. Yeah?
That is the absolute perfect segue now for me to go to the audience and to ask the audience to participate in this creativity and to ask if there are any questions. We have 2 roving microphones, so I don't know how we're going to see the questions, but anyway, people will wave, hopefully. If there are any questions from members of the audience, or any comments or views or anything you want to add. The gentleman down the front here anyway. If we can get a microphone to you.
Test, okay.
Thank you.
I said to myself, coming in here, I wasn't going to say anything.
No, please do.
The reason I have a mask on is I had COVID, but I tested negative.
We'll lean back.
But I'm retired about 15 or 18 years, like, and I just wonder now, how did I have time to work in the job I had?
Yeah.
Because every little chore around the house, including paying bills by computer and everything else, is taking longer. And I know what you said about the value of, do we know the value of things, like, you know, until such time as the value, they can measure this GDP or GNP or whatever it is,
Yeah.
to take into account the quality of life.
Yeah.
Are we going to be able to solve the problems related to climate change? Because everything has got more and more complex with digitization and everything else, like, and it's taken us more and more time. And there is a value on time as well, like, what is the value of, the importance of time in economics is, you all know about, like, but the other thing I want to say is thank you for your talk, and I probably only understood about 5% of it, but I got the gist of it anyhow. So the question is, why is life getting more complex?
A very good
And
question.
why can't we, and the last point I want to make is the one about, if something happens to my washing machine at home, I'm not going to repair it. I'm going to throw it out because it'll cost more to get a man to repair it and to travel.
Yeah.
So I don't see, you know, the repair business going too well until such time as the cost of a cheap washing machine becomes £1,000 or £2,000, and then I can, the alternative makes it possible to employ simple electric motor and repair it.
Okay.
But it's like the electric vehicles. The oil industry is promoting non-use of electric vehicles the whole time. Anytime you read anything on Facebook or anything else, just saying, forget about it, like, you know. Yeah. So this is where we're at.
It is.
Sorry about the ranting.
No, some very good points. Do you
No,
want
just to
pick up
say
the repair
that
piece?
all the product, all the appliances that we're using now were designed not to be repaired. So that's the problem. So we need the companies to be obliged to design and sell appliances that can be repaired, because they didn't do it in the past 20 years. Before, at the beginning, they were. Then, at a certain point, it started a new wave, and so the company would say to engineers, please make this gum be dead in like 10 years or 5 years, because then it's cheaper, and so people can throw it away. So that was designed. So now we need to change the way our appliances are. They're gonna cost more, but they're gonna last more.
So that's a great, you're absolutely right. The way we're set up, one of the points of projects like the one we're involved in is to create, and this was Florian talking about creating new knowledge, just knowledge production. You know that, right? And in fact, most people know that. They know that the way value is created is in this irrational way to create waste to create value, right? And we all know this, right? One of the points of what we're trying to do is to take that knowledge and force it into the European Union so that you change the rules from what can be brought to market to reflect value exactly the way you were talking about it, right? There is an enormous value in the capacity of something to be repaired and reused rather than recycled. Recycling is the least useful way of dealing with waste, as it is. Give you an example. We were talking to a brilliant woman who runs the Galway Wool Cooperative, and you should all head out to Athenry at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, right? It's Saturday morning. It's going to be an amazing event. But Blondin was telling us, did you know that wool is categorized as a Category 3 waste product in Ireland? And if you're a farmer, you have to pay to have it taken away by a registered waste disposal expert, right? It is, and people do know this, right? What you have to, and there is no European-wide regulation. So for beef, there's regulation, for other things, there's regulation, but not for what we used to call the super sheep, right? That gave you milk and meat and wool, which was the Irish sheep. There was a Roscommon and the Galway. It's all new knowledge, right? We all learned this yesterday. But what we're going to be able to do is build a case study around that Galway Wool Cooperative and mobilize that at the European level and find the other hill farmers around Europe who have exactly the same problem And you could totally change the way in which wool is used and its value so that things like felting and things like insulation and the right way to make an Aran sweater with a properly Irish wool, that all those things become possible if we change the way the market is structured. And the kind of knowledge we're trying to create is to punch through and make those kinds of changes.
And this is exactly why we think that art and culture and also, I mean, heritage, cultural heritage, really matters in this culture, because a general economy can learn so much from the peculiarities of, let's say, the artistic or creative economies, especially when it comes to, why are we listening to theater play, or listening to music and watching theater plays and looking at paintings that are hundreds and more years old? No, there is something that allows us, and this is not inherent in the quality. Yeah, I mean, this is not. There might be other painters that are totally forgotten from the same period. Yeah, that might have been back then considered much more relevant or exciting. Yeah, it is a kind of repurposing. Yeah, we look at it over and over again, and we produce new meaning out of it. And I think this is a principle of a that can drive a regenerative economy. Yeah? And this really means that we have to understand, for example, cultural heritage as valuable, not because it is so old and so purposeless and so on and so forth, yeah? But precisely because it tells us today what we could do or what would be the future forms of value creation. Yeah? Because also, we don't think that, I mean, it would be a mistake if we would say, we want to respond now to all the requests and needs of the market. Yeah? Because then in 5 years, there are other needs. And so, I mean, our role as artists and creatives is always to anticipate future strategies of valorization. Yeah? And this is the kind of, it's another privilege, yeah? But this is also what we can share with the general economy, and I think the repair movement is a fantastic example in this context. Yeah, but we can expand this to basically any aspect or any sector of the economy. But it requires a kind of creative thinking, yeah, and new forms of value or new strategies of valorization or creating value.
Very good. Have we any other questions from the audience? It's hard to see. There's one in the middle there. If the lady with the mic can see you, put your hand very high up. Oh, Kieran. I see Kieran Loftus in the middle there anyway.
Look at you.
Thank you. Well, I suppose the European Union, the European Commission are a force for change, and that's a sort of optimistic takeaway from this. But I listened to this and I got less and less optimistic as the discussion went on, because there are so many elephants outside the room that make me feel like listening to this discussion, well, it's about what's it going to be like after the apocalypse. You know, here we are in a world where the prospective leader of the free world, the most powerful country in the world, says, drill, baby, drill. If you talk about popular culture and scratch the surface here in Ireland, it's how big is your SUV? And don't you dare touch the national dairy herd. And re-wetting the land, we'll do that on someone else's land. And by the way, let's go off to Bratislava for the weekend for the stag night on our very cheap flights. So I kind of think, well, yeah, this is very interesting, and it's very positive and very creative. I'm not saying it's not positive, and yes, absolutely. How are we going to live in a different society? But I think the bit of it that I felt was missing is we're just about 1 million miles from that different society and going in a completely different direction.
Ooh, okay. I'm not sure we have this kind of time, but let me go back at you. Let me go back at you.
Briefly.
All right. When I'm teaching about the French Revolution, I always ask my class, how far away do you think you are from revolutionary change, which is not the same as transition, different thing, right? How far away do you think you are from revolutionary change today? And they all go. They get real complicated and they get theoretical. I'm going, for the love of God, 2 square meals, 1 square meal for your kids, right? That's what will bring something down. So watershed events happen fast, okay? And once the facts are clear, and I don't mean the scientific facts, once the simple facts, the beautifully put by Caroline, if the current way we live is unsustainable, if it really is, if we're not messing around here, right? If utility maximization is no longer the norm through which we're going to evaluate our behavior, what will happen quickly. Humans will orientate to different values. Now, it's going to be ugly because what you noted was the other thing that happens in transitions. Humans are meaning-making animals more than they're anything else. And they will cling to meaning if another meaning isn't there. So the kind of reactionary behavior we're seeing is utterly predictable, right? Because someone will drive their car because they love their car and they can't imagine a life without the car because their identity is wrapped up in it. If you don't have a better story, that's what they're going to do, right? And I think there's been a massive failure on the part of us who are energized and aware of the climate crisis at that existential level, right? We've kind of brought it into riding bikes and sandal wearing. What we haven't given is the story. There is this other world, and it could, you in my Cullen, thinking, you know what, I don't want to do mechanical engineering. I really want to do something else because I have this vision of would be really cool business and I want to learn this. And I'm going to ask the university, they've got no course that's for me, but I want to do half of that and half of that because that's where I will go. That person could be tip in the future. So I don't share your pessimism. I think the fact of non-reproducibility of our society is given. That's just given. It's terrifying for people because they can't see how to make sense of themselves past that. And our job is to start allowing them to sketch in those meanings for themselves.
With that slightly greater note of hope, have we time for one more question? One more, okay. Do we have a question? Well, we have a couple of hands over here. The lady on this side with the mic, there's two.
Yeah.
Two more over there. There's two over there, Caroline, as well.
Okay, gosh, okay. Well, go on then. Whoever gets the mic first. Gentleman here in the middle. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I must say I share the same platform as a previous speaker. Because the flip switch is already flipping. We know that from the science. We now have ocean temperatures up 1.5 degrees centigrade. So it's not a case of when this comes, it's when and how fast it's going to come. And living on the other side of it, I'm not optimistic in the context of the quality of life. It may not destroy us, but it will very much have us living in fear of a catastrophe that potentially is only 5 miles from where you live, regardless of where you live, whether that's heat or whether that's rain. But I think that the topic is very important. I think what I was missing was the action behavior that changes people. And I believe we have to try and educate from the bottom up with regard to science so that they have some metric. And I'll just give you 2 brief examples. There was sadly a poor girl in London died about 10 years ago from asthma. And her mother was determined, and so were some legal experts, and they challenged the inquest. And after 3 years, it was changed that she died from air pollution. Yeah. And that was just the science hitting home that had killed that child. Now, we've done some research in different ways, but if you look at Purple Air, they're a uniform monitoring site for being able to measure air pollution outside your own home that goes on the internet that allows you to be able to judge whether today is the proper day. The other example I would just give, recently I was down with a farmer down towards Wexford, and he had 500 cattle. And I said to him, I says, you do know how much carbon you're burning? And he says, well, I have no idea. And I said, well, you're burning 45,000 tonne of carbon a year. And I says, what would help you? And he said, well, what do you mean? I says, would metrics help you? He says, yes, it would. And I says, really? He says, yes. And he looked at his watch. And he says, I slept well last night because this watch told me that I slept well last night. But the passion with which he believed it, I just think we need to educate from the bottom up with hard data that says where we are so that the common person can understand and go to their politician or go to their town hall and say, I'm not happy because of this. But at the moment, we're talking at the top, and people don't know where to go because they don't really understand the science. Sorry.
Very good. Good point. Are we out of time? I'm looking for Jake. Could we take one more maybe on this side? Yeah. Oh, Louise. Hi.
Oh, Louise.
Perhaps this question has already been answered in some way by the last questionnaire and touched on earlier as well. But for us to take away today, what do you see as the role of the university in achieving the ambition that you have in this project?
Okay, give that one to you, Jim, I think.
Can I be stopping Vice President for 2 seconds? Because I'm supposed to give the party line on that one. All right. I think the role of the university is twofold. Universities are stores of cultural value, and we have to de-risk everybody else's behavior, and we have to carry it for you, right? The net in Europe especially, just stick to Europe, the network of European universities is so dense. We are the one social actor that doesn't have to constantly pay attention to markets, that isn't disciplined by the market. We can be the partner for new ideas and for new initiatives. And we can be a home and allow people to take the risk, right? And the other bit then, the obvious bit is about the scientific research, and I completely concur with the point about education all the time and being clear on the data, and absolutely couldn't agree more. But there's also then a notion that we have to be hacked. I always say, listen, we're 21st century institutions with a 19th century division of labor and a 12th century organizational pattern. It isn't really much of a mistake that we're not much good at dealing with stuff, right? We just have to be way more radical in how we unlock the organizational potential and who we partner with. And that might mean some universities falling down and going out of business. Frankly, I think there are more important things.
On that cheery note.
Caroline has to run the university, right?
Okay, I think I'm not seeing Jake waving madly at me to tell me to stop, but nonetheless, I think we probably are out of time. I know there are probably a lot more questions, and the speakers will be here for a few minutes at the end if people want to come up and ask questions. I just want to take this opportunity to say a huge thank you to our three speakers, to Jim, to Florian, and to Zoe for their contributions, which have been very, very thought-provoking. Clearly, a lot of questions, I think, and Florian, you hit the right note when you said we're not here to provide all the answers, we're here to provoke the questions. And so certainly a lot of that has happened. And thank you to you, the audience, for your engagement and your participation, and particularly to our youngest member up the back, whose contributions were excellent. And for whom actually we really are all here to answer questions for. So thank you very much. Thanks to Galway International Arts Festival as well. We've appreciated your time. And as I say, the speakers will be around to answer questions if you want to come up at the end. Thank you.
Thank you.